"You have kind eyes," she told her blind date, before learning who he really was. 5 minutes into the blind date, Sophie Parker said the one thing Daniel Reed had not heard in 6 years. She looked across the small cafe table, smiled nervously, and said, "You have kind eyes." Daniel almost dropped his coffee. Not because the compliment was strange, because for a long time, people had called his eyes many things. No one who knew his name ever started there. Sophie did not notice his reaction at first. She was too busy trying to survive the date without following the instructions her sister kept sending in rapid-fire text messages. Her phone buzzed again beside her cup. "Claire, ask about his job, but casually. Do not mention your classroom hamster. Actually, maybe mention the hamster. Men like responsibility." Sophie flipped the phone face down. Daniel noticed. "Everything okay? My sister thinks this date requires live coaching." That sounds terrifying. She once described herself as a romantic strategist. Is that a real profession? Only in her apartment. Daniel smiled, and Sophie relaxed a little. Claire had arranged the date through a friend of a friend, which meant Sophie had received exactly 3 facts about him. His name was Daniel. He was 30. He worked with boats. That was it. Claire had called it mysterious. Sophie had called it how people end up on crime podcasts. Still, she had agreed, mostly because Claire had used the phrase, "You cannot spend your whole life teaching 4-year-olds how to share crayons and then go home to eat cereal for dinner." Sophie had argued that cereal was underrated. Claire had not been moved. Daniel had arrived before her. She had spotted him immediately at a corner table in the Seattle cafe, sitting too straight, hands around a coffee cup he had not touched. He wore a navy jacket, simple jeans, and the expression of a man waiting for bad news rather than a blind date. Sophie almost turned around. Not because he looked unfriendly, because he looked afraid. That softened her. Now, 15 minutes later, she had learned he was quiet but funny in a dry, careful way. He listened, like listening mattered. He asked questions without making her feel inspected. Then Sophie reached for her coffee. Her sleeve caught the rim. The cup tipped. Coffee splashed across the table and directly onto the front of her pale blue dress. For 1 full second, both of them stared. Then Sophie whispered, "I have chosen elegance." Daniel grabbed napkins from the dispenser so fast he nearly knocked over the sugar jar. "I'm sorry," he said, as if he had personally arranged the spill. "You didn't do it. I witnessed it. Very suspicious." He handed her a stack of napkins. Their fingers brushed. It was small, ridiculously small, but Sophie felt it anyway. Daniel looked away first. She dabbed at her dress, making the stain worse. "Well," she said, "now you know the truth. I'm not mysterious. I'm just damp." Daniel laughed. A real laugh. Brief, surprised, almost rusty, like he had not expected it from himself. That was when Sophie really looked at him. Not at the jacket, or the nervous hands, or the careful way he kept glancing toward the door whenever someone entered. At him. There was sadness in his face, yes, something tired, something guarded. But beneath it, there was gentleness. Not softness exactly. Gentleness that had survived damage. The words left her before she could overthink them. "You have kind eyes." Daniel went completely still. The cafe noise seemed to fade behind him. Sophie immediately regretted everything. "Oh no," she said. "That sounded weird." He blinked. "No, it did. It sounded like something a grandmother says before offering soup." "No, it's just, I promise I don't usually review people's facial features before the first refill." Daniel looked down at his coffee. His thumb moved slowly along the paper cup. Then he said, very quietly, "Thank you." Something about the way he said it made Sophie stop joking. It was not flirtatious. It was not casual. It sounded like she had given him something he did not know what to do with. Her phone buzzed again. "Claire, is he cute? Send signal. Touch your necklace if yes. If no, fake stomach pain." Sophie turned the phone off. Daniel noticed. "Firing your strategist?" She needs to learn boundaries. Brave. Reckless, actually. She has a key to my apartment. This time his smile came easier. They talked for another hour. About her kindergarten class. About his boat repair work near Tacoma. About bad first dates, terrible parking. They walked along the waterfront near Tacoma, where gulls screamed like unpaid actors and the air smelled of salt, rain, and fried food from nearby stalls. Daniel pointed out the types of boats in the harbor. Sophie pretended to understand, then admitted she thought all boats were basically cars that had made risky life choices. Daniel laughed so hard he had to stop walking. That laugh was becoming her favorite thing about him. But there were small mysteries. He never asked to take pictures. When Sophie pulled out her phone near the water and tried to capture the sunset, Daniel stepped aside so naturally she almost missed it. At the weekend market, a vendor offered to take their photo in front of a flower wall. Sophie smiled. Daniel's face changed, only for a second. Then he said he hated staged pictures. At dinner, when she asked if he used Instagram, he said no. Facebook? No. LinkedIn? He looked genuinely offended. Sophie teased him about being secretly 90 years old. Daniel accepted this with dignity. Still, she noticed, he lived like someone trying not to leave fingerprints. One afternoon, he came by the preschool to pick her up for dinner. Sophie found him outside the classroom door being interrogated by Mia, a 5-year-old with pigtails, light-up sneakers, and the moral intensity of a Supreme Court justice. "Are you Miss Sophie's boyfriend?" Daniel looked at Sophie for help. Sophie offered none. "I'm her friend," he said carefully. Mia narrowed her eyes. "Do you have snacks?" "No." "Then why are you here?" Daniel considered this. "That's a fair question. Can you do a cartwheel?" "No." "Can you fix dinosaurs? Toy dinosaurs or real dinosaurs?" Mia looked disappointed. "You don't know anything." Sophie laughed until her stomach hurt. Later, at a diner with cracked red booths and excellent fries, Daniel admitted he had never been more afraid in his life. Of a 5-year-old? She had follow-up questions. "She liked you. She threatened to judge my shoes. That means she respected you." Daniel looked down at his boots. "Should I be worried?" "Always." These were the moments that made Sophie forget the questions. The missing photos. The careful silences. The way Daniel's face sometimes shut down when someone said the word accident, even in ordinary conversation. With her, he was gentle, awkward, funny in small, unexpected bursts. He remembered she hated olives. He remembered the name of the classroom hamster Claire had warned her not to mention. He remembered that her confidence often arrived late to conversations and made room for it. And Daniel liked that Sophie did not try to impress him. She arrived with coffee stains, glitter in her hair, classroom paint on her sleeve. She told him stories where she was not always flattering. She admitted she was bad at parallel parking and worse at pretending to understand wine. He found her honesty almost frightening. People usually tried to become better versions of themselves around him. Sophie seemed relieved to be exactly herself. The trouble came at the Harbor Lights Festival. It was the kind of local event where every booth sold something handmade, overpriced, or fried. Strings of bulbs hung over the street. A band played near the pier. Children ran past with painted faces and sugar-heavy confidence. Sophie was laughing because Daniel had just lost a ring toss game to a 12-year-old and accepted defeat like a man reconsidering all his life choices. Then someone behind them said his name, not loudly, but with recognition. "Daniel Reed?" Daniel stopped. Sophie felt the change in him before she understood it. His shoulders tightened. His face went blank. A man in a gray jacket stood near the cider booth, staring at him. The man's expression was not friendly. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the man looked at Sophie, looked back at Daniel, and said, coldly, "Didn't expect to see you here." The warmth of the festival seemed to drain away. Daniel's hand, which had been close to Sophie's a second earlier, dropped to his side. "Take care," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked away. Sophie followed, confused and suddenly uneasy. "Daniel?" He did not stop until they reached the edge of the parking lot. I'm sorry, he said. I should go. What happened? Nothing. That wasn't nothing. He looked at her then, and the fear in his eyes was no longer hidden well enough. I'm sorry, he repeated. Then he left. Sophie stood beneath the glow of the festival lights, surrounded by music and laughter, holding 2 untouched paper cups of cider. For the first time, she understood that Daniel was not just private. He was hiding from something, and whatever it was, other people already knew. Daniel apologized 2 days after the festival, not with excuses, with flowers. Unfortunately, they were from the grocery store, still wrapped in plastic, with a discount sticker he had forgotten to remove. Sophie stared at the bouquet. Daniel stared at the sticker. Then he sighed. I panicked in the floral section. Sophie should have stayed angry longer. Instead, she laughed. That became the problem with Daniel Reed. He made it difficult to protect herself from liking him. He did not explain what had happened at the festival. Not fully. He only said there were parts of his past he was not proud of, and that some people still had reasons to remember him badly. It was not enough. But it was honest enough to keep the door open, so Sophie let him stay in her life, carefully. One Friday, he came to the preschool's family day to help build cardboard boats with the children. Sophie had warned him it would be chaotic. Daniel had said he worked with wood and marine repairs, so he could handle paper, glue, and children. He was wrong. Within 20 minutes, one child had glued a feather to his sleeve. Another had declared him a horse. Mia, the same girl who once judged his shoes, climbed onto his back while shouting, "To the moon!" Daniel looked at Sophie from across the classroom with silent, betrayed panic. Sophie laughed so hard she had to sit down. By the end of the event, Daniel's cardboard boat looked less like a boat and more like a structural apology. The children loved him anyway. Later that week, Sophie visited his workshop near the docks. It smelled of cedar, salt, varnish, and sawdust. Half-finished wooden boats rested under hanging lights. Tools lined the walls. The whole place felt quiet in a way that did not feel lonely. Daniel showed her how he shaped wood for the curve of a hull. His hands moved with calm confidence, gentle over rough surfaces. Sophie liked watching him there. In his workshop, Daniel seemed less like a man hiding from life and more like a man trying to make something strong enough to float. That evening, they sat outside near the water while the sky turned lavender. Daniel spoke first. "I know I scared you at the festival." Sophie looked at him. "Yes, I'm sorry. I know." He rubbed his thumb along a scar on his hand. "Sometimes people recognize me, and I become someone I don't want to be anymore." She waited. "I survived something," he said finally. "Someone else didn't." Sophie felt the weight in that sentence. He did not say more. This time, she did not push. Instead, she told him something of her own, that she often felt ordinary, replaceable, like the kind of woman people described as sweet when they couldn't think of anything more interesting. Daniel looked at her as if she had said the most impossible thing. "Sophie," he said softly, "you make people
Thuyền đẹp
feel
quá,
safe."
anh làm được
She
đấy.
laughed,
Cảm ơn em.
uncomfortable.
Cùng nhau làm
That's
thì
not
vui hơn.
exactly
Đúng
exciting.
vậy, em
It
thích
is when
quá.
you've spent
Khi nào xong?
years feeling like a
Sắp
threat.
rồi, tuần
The
sau thử
words
nước được.
stayed with her. A week later, after dinner, Daniel walked her home beneath a soft Seattle rain. They stopped under the awning outside her building, both reluctant to say goodnight. There was no dramatic music, no perfect moonlight, just wet pavement, distant traffic, and Daniel looking at her like he was afraid to want anything. Sophie stepped closer first. The kiss was gentle, careful, almost sad at the edges, then warmer, real. When they pulled apart, Daniel closed his eyes for 1 second, as if trying to memorize the feeling before the world took it back. Sophie smiled. Then her phone buzzed. A message from a parent at school lit up the screen, a short text underneath. "Miss Parker, is this the man from Family Day?" Sophie frowned and opened it. The article loaded slowly. Then the photo appeared. Daniel, younger, paler, standing outside a courthouse. Below the image was the headline, "Local man survives crash that killed best friend, questions remain." His name was printed clearly, Daniel Reed. Sophie's hand went cold. Daniel saw the screen, and everything in his face changed. Daniel did not try to take the phone from her. That was the first thing Sophie noticed. He only stood there under the awning, rain falling behind him, his face stripped of all the careful calm she had come to know. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The article glowed between them like evidence. Sophie looked from the photo to Daniel, then back again. The man in the image was younger, thinner, hollow-eyed, surrounded by microphones and cameras. But it was him. Daniel Reed. The name she had been saying for weeks. The name he had never fully explained. I can tell you, he said quietly. Sophie's throat tightened. When? He flinched. Because they both knew the answer. Not before he kissed her. She stepped back. I need to go inside. Sophie, I can't do this right now. His face looked like he had been expecting those words since the first day they met. Maybe that hurt most of all. He nodded once. She walked into her building without looking back. Upstairs, Sophie sat on the edge of her bed in the dark, still wearing her damp coat, and searched his name. At first, she told herself she only wanted facts. But the internet did not give facts gently. It gave headlines. Young man killed in late-night crash near Rainier Bridge. Driver survives accident that claims best friend. There were photos. Daniel outside the courthouse. Daniel at 24, staring at the ground. A smiling picture of another young man named Liam Walsh. Liam had bright eyes, messy blonde hair, and the careless confidence of someone who had not known he would become a tragedy. Sophie kept reading. The articles contradicted each other. One said Daniel had been driving too fast. Another said rain and poor road conditions were major factors. One commenter claimed Daniel had been drunk. Another insisted toxicology reports cleared him. One local forum said Liam's family blamed Daniel. Another said Liam's younger brother publicly defended him. There were old comments beneath every article. Cruel ones, sympathetic ones. People who had never been in the car wrote as if they had been sitting in the back seat. Sophie scrolled until the words blurred. Her phone rang. Daniel. She watched his name fill the screen, then fade. A minute later, a text appeared. I should have told you. I'm sorry. Please let me explain. She did not answer. Claire called next, then texted. Are you okay? That parent messaged me too. Call me. Sophie turned the phone face down, but silence did not help. The truth was too loud now. She thought of every moment Daniel had stepped away from a camera. Every time he changed the subject, she had thought he was private, maybe wounded, maybe shy, but he had been choosing what she knew and what she did not. That realization hurt more than the accident itself. Because people had pasts, people made mistakes, people survived things they did not know how to explain. Sophie understood that. What she could not understand was how easily he had let her trust him while keeping the largest part of his life locked behind a door he never mentioned. The next morning, she was exhausted. At school, she moved through the day on instinct. Songs, snacks, spilled juice. A dispute over whether a plastic dinosaur was emotionally unavailable. Normally, the children's chaos grounded her. That day, even their laughter sounded far away. During lunch, Claire showed up at the classroom door holding 2 coffees, and the expression of a woman trying very hard not to say, I told you dating was dangerous. Sophie let her in. Claire did not joke at first. That was how Sophie knew she was truly worried. They sat at the tiny art table, knees nearly touching their chins. Claire had read the articles too. She asked if Sophie was scared of Daniel. Sophie answered immediately, no, and that surprised her. She was not scared of him, not of his hands, not of who he had been with her. She was angry, hurt, confused, but not afraid. That made everything more complicated. Daniel called again that evening. Sophie let it ring. Then came another message. I didn't tell you because I liked being someone before being a story. That doesn't make it right. But it's the truth. She read it 3 times, then cried, because some part of her understood the sentence even while another part hated him for it. By the 3rd day, Sophie had read enough to know that no article could give her the whole truth. Every version had missing pieces. Every opinion had a motive. Daniel was either a monster, a victim, a coward, a scapegoat, or a tragic young man who had been unlucky enough to live. But none of those versions matched the man who let children cover him in feathers, the man who listened when she said she felt ordinary, the man whose eyes had gone soft when she told him he was kind. And that was exactly why she felt betrayed, because she had not fallen for a headline. She had fallen for Daniel, and Daniel had not trusted her enough to tell her the story behind his name. That night, Sophie finally picked up the phone, not to call him. Not yet. She opened his last message and typed one line. "I don't know what I believe." A minute passed. Then his reply came. "I understand." Another message followed. "But if you ever want the truth from me, I'll tell you everything. No excuses." Sophie stared at the screen until it dimmed. The rain pressed softly against her window. For days, she had thought the question was whether Daniel was guilty. Now she realized the real wound was different. He had let her look into his eyes and call them kind, while hiding the reason he believed he did not deserve kindness at all. Sophie agreed to meet Daniel on a Sunday afternoon, a small public park by the water, where people walked dogs and children chased gulls with the reckless confidence of people who had never read comment sections. Daniel arrived before her. Of course he did. He was sitting on a bench facing the harbor, hands folded, shoulders tense. When Sophie stopped beside him, he stood immediately. He looked tired, not from one bad night, from 6 years of them. "Thank you for coming," he said. Sophie sat first. Daniel sat beside her, leaving careful space between them. For a while they watched the water. Then Daniel began. 6 years ago, Liam Walsh had been his best friend. Not just a friend, a brother in everything except blood. They had grown up together, worked summer jobs together, made terrible decisions together, and once tried to build a kayak in Liam's garage, using internet instructions and unjustified confidence. That night they had gone to a birthday party outside Tacoma. Daniel had planned not to drink much. Liam had planned nothing at all. By midnight, Liam was drunk, laughing too loudly, insisting he was fine to drive. Daniel had taken his keys. They argued in the driveway for 10 minutes while rain came down hard enough to blur the streetlights. Daniel still remembered Liam's last insult. "You always think you're saving everybody." Then Daniel got behind the wheel, because he thought that was the responsible choice, because he thought if he drove, Liam would get home alive. The road near Rainier Bridge was slick. Visibility was bad. A delivery truck coming from the opposite direction lost control on the curve. Daniel swerved. There was no time, only headlights, Liam shouting his name, metal folding around them, then silence. Daniel woke up in a hospital bed with broken ribs, stitches across his forehead, and a police officer standing near the door. Liam never woke up. Sophie listened without interrupting. Daniel's voice stayed even, but his hands betrayed him. They trembled against his knees. "Toxicology cleared me," he said. "The investigation cleared me." The truck driver admitted he lost control, but Liam's parents were grieving. People wanted someone to blame. I was driving. I lived. That was enough. Sophie's chest hurt. "I'm not innocent," Daniel said. She looked at him. "I said cruel things to Liam that night. I was angry, tired of cleaning up after him. I told him he was going to ruin someone's life." His mouth twisted. "Then he died in my passenger seat." Before Sophie could answer, a man approached from the path. Daniel saw him and stood. Sophie tensed. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with Liam's same blonde hair and sad eyes. Daniel said quietly, "Sophie, this is Marcus, Liam's younger brother, the person who should have hated Daniel most." Marcus looked at Sophie with tired kindness. "I figured you should hear from someone who was there after," he said. Sophie stood slowly. Marcus did not defend Daniel like a lawyer. He did not make the story clean. He said Liam had been reckless sometimes, loved deeply, lived loudly, made people worry. He said Daniel had spent years visiting Liam's grave alone, Years sending anonymous money to the scholarship fund. Years accepting hatred because he believed arguing would disrespect the dead. Then Marcus said the sentence Sophie would remember most. If I forgave Daniel a long time ago, why can't everybody else? Daniel looked away. Marcus touched his shoulder once, then left them by the water. The park felt quieter after he was gone. Sophie turned to Daniel. There were still tears in her eyes, but her voice was steady. Why didn't you tell me? Daniel's face crumpled a little at the question. Not dramatically, just enough to show the exhaustion beneath everything. Because every time people learn my name, he said, they stop seeing my face. The words broke something open. In the beginning, they searched me online before I could explain. Later, I tried telling people early. They got careful, or curious, or kind in that awful way that means they're already leaving. He swallowed. With you, for a little while, I was just Daniel. Sophie whispered, You still should have told me. I know, no matter how scared you were. I know. He nodded, accepting the wound without defending it. Then his eyes filled. I'm sorry, he said, and for the first time since Sophie had met him, Daniel Reed began to cry, not silently. He covered his face with one hand, shoulders shaking like he hated himself for needing witness. Sophie did not rush to forgive him. She did not erase the lie, but she stepped closer, because the man in front of her was not a headline. He was a human being who had survived a terrible night and then spent 6 years standing trial in every room he entered. Sophie reached for his hand. Daniel held on like he had been waiting 6 years for someone to see both the truth and him. For 3 weeks, Sophie did not see Daniel. She thought about him constantly. Not in the simple, romantic way Claire assumed when she appeared at Sophie's apartment with soup, ice cream, and unwanted opinions. Sophie did not spend those weeks wondering whether Daniel was good or bad. That was what strangers online had done for 6 years. They had turned a terrible night into 2 clean categories. But Sophie had sat beside him in the park. She had heard Marcus speak. She had seen Daniel cry like a man who had survived the accident but never left the wreckage. So the question became harder. Could she trust someone who had hidden the truth because he was afraid? Could she forgive the silence without pretending it had not hurt? And could she admit that she still cared about him? One Friday afternoon, after her class had gone home and the room smelled faintly of crayons and animal crackers, Sophie found a paper boat on her desk. Mia had made it. On the side, in uneven marker, she had written, "Boats still float if they get dented." Sophie sat down and cried. Then she drove to the cafe where everything had started. Daniel was already there. Of course he was. He stood when he saw her, pale and nervous, as if he had spent the entire afternoon preparing to be left kindly. Sophie sat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, she smiled, softly. "I still think you have kind eyes." Daniel's face changed. A laugh broke through the tears in his eyes. Even after everything? Sophie reached across the table. Especially after everything. He looked down at her hand, then took it carefully. "I'm still angry you didn't tell me," she said. "I know. And this doesn't become easy just because I understand why. I know. But I don't want to let strangers decide who you are for me." Daniel closed his eyes. When he opened them, something in him looked lighter. Not finished, but no longer alone. Outside, Seattle glowed beneath the late afternoon sun. They left the cafe together and walked slowly down the street. No one recognized Daniel. For once, there was no headline between them. Only 2 people walking side by side, learning that the worst day of a life does not have to become the whole life. And sometimes love begins when someone is patient enough to look past what the world sees, and brave enough to stay after seeing the truth. Before you go, take a moment to think about what this story is really about. At first, it seems like a story about a blind date, but underneath all of that, it's really a story about identity. Because most of us carry a version of ourselves that we're afraid to show the world. Maybe it's a mistake we made years ago, and after enough time, we start believing that chapter is the whole book. Daniel wasn't trapped by a car accident. He was trapped by the belief that he would always be defined by it. And if we're honest, many of us do the same thing. We reduce ourselves to our worst day. But here's the lesson this story leaves behind. A terrible moment can change your life. It should not become your entire identity. One of the most beautiful things about being human is that we are always more complicated than a headline, a rumor, a mistake, or a single chapter of our story. And maybe real love begins when someone is willing to look beyond the version of us that the world has already decided to believe. Here's a pawview that stayed with me long after this story ended. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not proving that you're innocent. It's allowing someone to know the whole truth about you and trusting that they might stay anyway. So here's a question for you. Have you ever felt judged for something that didn't tell your whole story? Or have you ever discovered that someone was much different than the person you thought they were at first? Share your thoughts in the comments below. You never know whose heart might need to hear your perspective today. And if this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more emotional, romantic, and thought-provoking stories about second chances, difficult choices, healing, forgiveness, and the extraordinary ways people find each other when they need it most. Until next time, remember, you are not the worst thing that ever happened to you. You are the person who kept living afterward. And sometimes, that's the most beautiful part of the story.